about how to cooperate with the city government to solve this problem, make it as smoothly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. So next, we're going to talk just briefly with Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey is the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, and from 2002 to 2006, he was the director of the UN Millennium Project and a special advisor to the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan on millennium issues. And he, before that, World Bank, and very distinguished history. He's was called one of the 100 most influential leaders in the world by Time magazine. What's amazing about Jeffrey has been his larger scale systemic and economic knowledge, but connected with deep compassion and concern for the poor and for people in the developing world. So Jeffrey, when we look at these large cities, these amazing, turbulent, growing cities around the world, we're seeing, to follow up on Lumai was talking about, a informal, unpermitted, illegal migrant population. And yet when they move to cities, women have lower birth rates, people have higher education levels. Even when they're living in slums, they're doing better. But as we see in places like Mumbai, it can be incredibly unregulated and chaotic. At the same time, Lumai talked about the need to invest in infrastructure. And typically to build a high-speed rail system takes a lot of government command and control. And as we see in America, if you can't just clear your pathways and get your permits and get the thing built, it can take decades. So talk to us about this balance between the dynamic, almost illegal, unregulated ferment and the need for structure and organization.
Well, thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be back with the C100, so I'm really thrilled to be here. We're living, obviously, in a time of the most extraordinary change, and the scale of change is defined by China's achievements, has set a pace that's unprecedented in human history. The world reached 50% urban, as you pointed out, around 2007. The number of people being added to the cities will add another 2 billion or so population to cities by the year 2030. And in many parts of the world, places are completely overwhelmed by this phenomenon. And even where I would say the cities are not being overwhelmed, and I think it's true to say in China the cities are not overwhelmed by this phenomenon, the question of quality of life and sustainability looms very, very large. Because I don't think one could say that China's new cities necessarily are yet demonstrating the kind of quality of life that China aspires to. And some of the most headline development areas like Pudong and others, I think really open a question mark about sustainability and the role of the automobile and the quality of life and walking in the cities, because that's a place where you don't walk, basically, except from your car to a building. And it raises a lot of questions about design and urban planning. Yesterday I was with the new head of UN Habitat, which is the United Nations organization that is really the organization of the mayors of the world, because it's about the urban environment. And the new head of Habitat is somebody who comes with real credentials. He was the mayor of Barcelona, which I think, for those of you who know it, one would rank as one of the most beautiful quality of life cities in the entire world. And he was bemoaning to me, Jonathan, the fact that urban planning as a profession hardly exists in most of the world, actually. And that when urban planning is done in many cities of the world, it's building gated communities, not actually planning a sustainable, large-scale environment. So the first thing I would say is that most of the giant cities, but also most of the regional cities in developing countries, are not being planned in a concept that is likely to yield a high quality of life. And unfortunately, most of American cities, I don't believe, provide a role model for that. Now, you are experts in that. I think New York is certainly one of the highest quality of life cities in the world, but it's completely unusual from a U.S. point of view. Its density, its dependence on mass transit, on walking, I love living here without cars. When I moved from Harvard to Columbia University, we gave up all our cars. The quality of life shot up dramatically. Believe me, and our health shot up, and my weight dropped down because we were walking. But New York is unique, I think it's fair to say, in American cities in this regard, the lack of car ownership and the reliance on walking and mass transit as ways to move. So my feeling at one level, at the urban level, is that we need new concepts and a new scale that doesn't exist right now, and we need not only the C40s, which is a great project, but similar efforts around the world for your professions to think about this at the dramatic scale that is occurring. But I have to step back and make another warning, unfortunately, and that is that because of China's success, which to an economist I can tell you it's only the most thrilling thing one could see in the whole world, that more than 30 years of 10% plus GNP growth, we didn't even know this was possible economically and organizationally till China proved it after 1978. The scale of world resource use has risen so remarkably that the burden of human activity on the planet is already so vast that we've entered a period of turbulence globally for which we have no markers. I was at the UN yesterday speaking to the world's environment ministers who have assembled here, and I had to give them a little bit of what we call a fire and brimstone speech about the reality that they can talk all they want, but unless we have far more directed action, we have entered a period in which the planet can break. And the reason is climate change, ocean acidification, loss of habitat. And I have to say, a lot of it, China has all its rights because it's still about 1/4 the consumption per person of the United States. But the planet as a whole is just feeling mass impact that is completely unprecedented on a global scale. Now, unfortunately, and I'll stop here on this little digression, the U.S. has been completely unserious about this for the last 20 years. We're in the hands of the oil industry, unfortunately. We're in the hands of vested interests that say don't change anything. And we're not changing anything right now. China's watching and wondering, well, how much should we invest if the United States isn't doing anything? We still need to catch up. This pattern will not work for the world. And unless China and the United States rise mutually to responsibility, we're going to break the planet, unfortunately. And this is the truth of where we are right now. So you have written recently about the role of corporations in the global economy and the difficulties of corporations in the global economy. So tell us some of your thoughts about that. Well, I wrote something called The Contagion of Corporate Corruption. So it wasn't just the difficulties of companies, it was the difficulties the companies are making. Yesterday we had a decision, 14 counts guilty of the largest insider trading scandal. But, you know, we've had every week a corporate scandal in this city for the last 3 years since the financial crisis. And that followed a raft of corporate scandals in the early years of the decade around the dot-coms, Enron, and accounting scandals. So global capitalism, in my view, which I have championed and tried to spread around the world, has overrun the regulatory boundaries. This is another little piece of advice, if you'll forgive me, that I would share. I was in Shanghai at the mayor's International Advisory Board meeting, and the former mayor of London came and said something that I found completely dreadful. He said, as he was advising the Shanghai mayor, he said, "Mayor, when we built the city of London, all we did was we completely deregulated it so we could outcompete New York." And the truth is that New York and London battled each other in a race to the bottom.